There is a kingdom in Africa. Well, there are many. But this is a kingdom ruled by the oldest dynasty in the world, the Alaouite dynasty. This is the Kingdom of Morocco. And today I'm going to do my best to try and explain why King Mohammed VI and his Morocco matter, not just to the 38 million Moroccans, but to every African watching, every world viewer wondering whether there is perhaps a third route, somewhere between economic stagnation and bloody revolution. We have some controversial opinions coming up today, featuring a discussion on Western Sahara, Israel-Muslim relations, and my own little take on how I would build a bear the politics edition, an autopsy of democracy because it is dead. So what if the answer isn't abolishing monarchy or dictatorship, but rather evolving it? Picture a state ruled by the oldest dynasty in the world, with a democratic parliament and a strong, independent judiciary. Tell me, does that kingdom not perhaps represent the strongest state government of any people in the world? If done correctly, perhaps in all of history. Now that kingdom doesn't exist yet, but I've been studying this man, and honestly, he's the most fascinating contradiction in African leadership today. Could Mohammed VI potentially shape a constitutional monarchy that looks like, smells like the 21st century? Not the ceremonial figureheads of Sweden, not the powerless symbolism of Britain, but something more tangible. Ready? Well then, let's get metaphors for all. 3 for all? Signposts. I think this discussion is best broken up into the following: history and geographics, geopolitics and currentics, the good, the bad and the ugly. Conclusions. Timestamps are below, but I would recommend you stay for the intrigue and to validate my one video mustache. Speaking of the mustache, it's in no way relevant. I don't know if Moroccans have anything special for mustaches. They probably don't, nobody does. But being a man, I was shaving and I realized that I could shave a mustache. Now anyway, Morocco is like a tagine pot. It looks calm on the outside, but inside it's a bubbling mix of Euro, Arab, Berberian, French, and what is he even saying? No, wait. Morocco is like a European produced but Africa-centric cookbook that you dropped into your spice rack and or everything onto the floor. It's overwhelming, I know, especially if you try and read slowly, but if you try and skip over anything quickly, you'll very quickly screw the recipe on a spectacular scale. There's how it's been like researching Morocco. See, with this one, I had no agenda, I had no big story or drama to cover, no opinion beforehand. In fact, I had very limited knowledge of this uniquely beautiful country and their people and this odd political setup. I had no idea I would be shown a new perspective on running a state, and this set me off on a voer. Voer is an Afrikaans word that I've earned, means like toil. Before we dive into the man then, let's just grab an understanding of the country, because Morocco and their people isn't just any country, it's a civilizational crossroads of complexity. Perhaps the only truly tri-continental people. They've got roughly 38 million people divided very evenly between male and female. But this culture really predates our modern concepts of ethnicity, of race. Being an Afrikaner myself, I do know what it's like to face questions of complexionity.
So if you're from Africa, why are you white?
Oh my god, Karen, you can't just ask people why they're white.
Come get your mind blown here though. Moroccan ancestry. These people's DNA tells a story that goes back way before our simplistic and binary black and white racial categories, and any of that ever existed. Roughly 30% made up of Ibero-Mauritian, the original North African hunter-gatherers, mixed up with about 33% of Anatolian farmer ancestry. Now this isn't just genetic trivia, this is kind of the foundation of what makes Morocco's position so unique, as neither fully African, neither Arab, nor European or Middle Eastern, but somehow all of these at once. Wow, 100% human. That's amazing. On top of that, the world's oldest university, the University of Al-Qarawiyyin. Al-Qarawiyyin? Wow, that's like the Icelandic of vowels, eh?
Well, my name is...
Anyway, Al-Qarawiyyin actually happens to also be here in Fez. Starting through the souks of Marrakesh or the Medina of Fez, you're most likely to hear the musical yet throatal cadence of the unique Darija Arabic dialect, as it is spoken by about 90% of the population.
واش كتهضر بالعربية واش كتهضر بالعربية عربية there's the a sound right there واش كتهضر بالعربية
Tanaldar bin Iglesia. I kid. When I say it sounds like someone teaching a language to a goat, I do of course mean the greatest of all time. The indigenous tongues that predate Arab conquest are known as the Berber languages, so they are like Tamazight, and these are spoken by about a quarter of the population. There's also French, spoken about by 30 to 50% of the population, with English slowly creeping in at about 20%. Spanish is also actually quite common and frequent. Now I realize this sounds super Karen-like to take offense on someone else's behalf, especially after being so offensive.
Oh my god, Karen.
But I'd just like you to note here that the word Berber does stem from the same Greek words that form the root for barbarian. So I don't know, maybe we should use something else. Okay, so when I started my research into Morocco, I started with Muhammad's father, King Hassan II. This is coincidental, but very much ill-advised if you're starting out to research a country to start with that guy. But I do feel like one needs to grasp his father and the iron fist that he so neatly wrapped in velvet gloves while sadomasochistically waving it over his country. The years of lead is what the Moroccans might have called Hassan's reign of repression from 1960s especially and the 1970s. Political opponents disappeared, torture was routine, the public was squashed whenever they showed any dissent, and it was done with a smile and a shrug. I don't want to discuss this dark past any more than I actually need to or that's necessary for this video, but if you are interested in Morocco properly, or if you're a Moroccan yourself, I highly recommend further viewings on this topic.
Non, jamais.
Qu'est-ce que tu penses de l'attentat qui a eu lieu contre le roi?
Ah, question politique, je peux pas. Je sais pas.
Pourquoi?
La question politique, je peux pas faire.
Est-ce que tu fais jamais de politique?
Jamais. Jamais de la vie.
Mais pourquoi?
Moi, je suis un jeune pauvre, je peux vivre, manger, c'est ça que je connais.
I'll put in something here, and also in the description is all of my sources that I use throughout, and further readings. So maybe just a mention of the 1965 massacres and Ben Burqa seems necessary, but I can't go into these much here. Skipping over most of it then, Morocco is a monarchy. In fact, the Alaouite dynasty is the oldest ruling family tree thing in the world. Only Japan's Yamato comes close. They are believed to be directly descendant of the Prophet Muhammad, like the Prophet Muhammad. That's a pretty big deal. Also worth noting is that Morocco is the first ever country to recognize the US back in the day. So they do have some deep, legitimate and authentic ties since. That's important later when I get to my rant. Skip details, painful colonial rule, shared Frenchful colonial rule, independence in 1957, and a return to the throne for Mohammed V, the current king's grandfather. He ruled as king until his death in 1961, where Hassan II then took power. Now, the thing that Hassan II did understand very well, that often is overlooked by other African leaders, is the strategic importance of his country to the West. He didn't waste any time choosing sides in the Cold War. Instead, he positioned Morocco as America's reliable Muslim buddy.
Today, the editors of the March of Time take you to the French protectorate of Morocco. 5 bases, big enough to accommodate our largest bombers, are being built by the Air Force in Morocco. Only 6 hours by B-36 to Moscow.
Location, loyalty, compliance. This is the American strategy, and that's what they demand from countries in this type of position. But this is done in exchange for protection, military insight, intelligence cooperation, and also US bases on their grounds, black spot exploitations in their borders. Hassan wrote the playbook for authoritarian legitimacy through Western partnerships. Shake a hand here, take a nice photo there, have a nice holiday for the King of America. So he set up that place somewhere foreign. Probably immoral prisoners are sent to be tortured to death, perhaps withholding some information, something perhaps to do with no clue about anything. Sorry about that census jumble. Just an attempt to be
In recent days, grave events there have posed a threat to an important link in the chain of American air bases now being constructed for the defense of Western Europe. But the air about them is troubled by a wave of terror, which has brought death to over 100.
CIA ensured that the international as well as local framing of news, propaganda, and any revolt was, of course, the devil's work, and swiftly crushed by the angelic regime. Anyway, King Mohammed VI took power in 1999. That's where we're getting to our current phase. He was just 35 and it's been a 25-year rule. He inherited this complicated legacy, a functioning state apparatus but built on repression, at least coming with the perks of international legitimacy, strategic partnerships that money just can't buy. The question was, though, would he be his father's son? Is Hassan's father? Would he be like his father Hassan? Rest assured, he was something new. So let's talk some numbers. Under a North African herd marked by political upheaval, violent economic volatility, and Arab Springs, Morocco stands out as a truly remarkable exception to the rule. Their GDP hit about $155 billion in 2024, that's last year, solidifying its position as the 6th largest African economy by sheer GDP. It's undoubtedly the most competitive one in North Africa, and this stability rests on key industries that showcase both traditional strength and modern diversification. It has emerged as a continental powerhouse in automotive manufacturing, for example. They're making engines for people like Boeing, Peugeot. What's the other French car brand? Renault. The kingdom has become Africa's largest car exporter. They've overtaken my own country of South Africa recently. They also have approximately 70% of global phosphate reserves. Well, it's largely in the region of Western Sahara, but we'll get to that in a minute. It maintains its position as the world's largest exporter and is the 3rd largest in phosphate-related products. So what do I mean by a phosphate-related product? Well, predominantly every farmer in the world requires it. It's for their fertilizer. Basically, this is the real deal if you want to make the fake It's a strong game to be in. And on top of that, Morocco's Atlantic and Mediterranean coastlines, they yield significant marine resources, especially sardines, for example. They contribute, I think, about 50%, that's 1 in 2 sardines in the world, to our markets. Not mentioning cannabis. Cannabis, well, often overlooked as an official discussion point, Morocco is a major hashish producer and supplies about 70%. I know I say 70 often, but I promise I'm not making these stats up. Roughly 70% of Europe's hash. They have high ambitions, but staying sober to realize them. Morocco's trade partnerships reveal their grander strategy. Now, the EU remains their largest trading partner with about 62%, but Chinese investment is booming like it is everywhere in Africa, and they're getting to about 20% of their trade. American military cooperation continues, and increasingly Morocco is looking south to sub-Saharan Africa. There are a lot of visitations, massive African projects, and investment in things like gas pipelines. Also, check out my other video on Africa in general. It's very heartwarming, heartfelt, and it's got stats and stuff. The king has visited more African countries than any other Moroccan king in history, and this isn't just diplomacy, it's a return to African Union. In 2017, they did just that, signaling a renewed continental engagement after decades of absence. And this is kind of shown with things like sub-Saharan banking investments, telecommunications, infrastructure projects like the very ambitious Nigeria-Morocco gas pipeline. Despite economic progress, Morocco faces a persistent challenge that threatens long-term stability with their chronic youth problem. What's that mean? It means that their population tends to look like this, and their median age is about 30 and tends to stay about 30. Finally, the Western Sahara dispute remains Morocco's most significant geopolitical challenge, which was a direct component of a normalization deal with Israel. But this quid pro quo arrangement does demonstrate how Morocco is starting to leverage its strategic value to advance its own territorial claims. France's recent recognition in 2004, coming along with a $10.8 billion fresh investment deal, is another testimony to this. It's a diplomatic coup.
For France, the present and future of this territory fall within the framework of Moroccan sovereignty.
The transformation of Morocco begins with understanding its current king. Now, where his father, Hassan II, ruled with what people have started calling authoritarian paternalism, his son introduced what can be described as consensual modernization. He removed many of the rigid protocols of royal ceremony. He allowed Moroccans to see their king driving his own car, riding jet skis, and being a normal person, engaging directly with citizens, being a real human. Now, this always balanced by remaining discreet, dignified, curious, a very reserved man. More than mere public relations, he represents a fundamental shift towards royal governance based on consensus and consent. Pinch of salt, of course, but the man's a gentleman, if we're allowed to use such phrases in today's world. A pragmatic modernist philosophy coupled with a deep respect for Morocco and its Islamic identity. Morocco's ambitious renewable energy strategy is targeting a whopping 52% electricity generation from sources of renewable energy. This is just by 2030, that's 5 years from now, and they are well on track. They're building on current diversified electricity capacity of 1.6 gigawatt annual solar, 1.28 gigawatt annual wind, 1.2 gigawatt hydro. The centerpiece is, of course, the Noor Oraz, a $9 billion investment spanning 3,000 acres in the Sahara Desert. It represents one of the world's largest concentrated power installations, and it's something that I'm really keen to cover sometime soon, so maybe look out for that. The Morocco Offer Framework designates 1 million hectares of green hydrogen initiatives with over $32 billion in approved projects on the way now. This positions Morocco to transform energy up to Europe, down to Africa. It's very exciting stuff. It's the crown jewel of infrastructure development, electricity. Let's not forget road and rail. So the Al Barak high-speed rail system is the first ever in Africa. It makes Morocco the first African nation to operate a high-speed rail, and it started in 2018, connecting Casablanca to Tangiers, hitting up a 2-hour journey between the two of them, speeds up to 320 kilometers per hour through a $2.4 billion investment. But to me, this king's engagement in international relations represent a masterclass of how medium-sized powers can really come to punch above their weight through skillful statecraft. Morocco is now well positioned as a stable, moderate Muslim kingdom, one that stands as a beacon of political and socio-economic stability amongst exceptionally volatile African and Arab regional companions. In doing so, this country has been able to attract foreign investment much more consistently and much more whoppingly, with partnerships that elude their neighbors. It's usual issues that development countries face, but Morocco is starting to show that they can actually handle the challenges while consistently producing progress and output. He snuck the Moroccan dream right there into our minds and made the nation's growth a vision that is something truly appealing to all of those on the outside, both to strict Arabs, Western sensibilities, African and Asian intricacies. Like, the strategic understanding of how to apply soft power has really transformed Morocco's profile. It's a remarkable achievement to extend beyond traditional diplomacy. Most notably, perhaps this is demonstrated by the Atlas Lines.
Achatala. And the series!
Their historic semi-final run at the 2022 World Cup in Qatar is an exemplary achievement. Now, this is an exemplary use of strategy within sports to foster national unity and create a platform for international prestige. It's branding. It's something that Nelson Mandela, for example, utilized with rugby very similarly in the 90s when we were going through a lot of... This achievement is a consequence of systemic planning that started back in 2008. World-class facilities involved comprehensive youth systems that play often against other while-competing countries. The establishment of Africa's best league, arguably, the psychological impact on Moroccan society is profound. It allows millions of Arabs and Africans to see their own region represented at the highest level of global competition, of the most famous sport, for example. It transforms national sentiment into a little critical chant of Arab and African countries unifying behind celebratory songs. And this ripples into more opportunity. They're hosting the 2025 African Cup of Nations at the end of this year. By the way, if this channel gets very successful, I will go to Morocco and I shall further my findings. But let's try and do it by January. Then, I can go and watch some football too. It's demonstrating the kingdom's growing influence and progressive involvement in global purpose, I want to say, showcasing its recent infrastructure developments, attracting international investment. They're really good at this. It seems trivial, but I assure you that it serves multiple strategic purposes, from international investment all the way to projecting Morocco as something cool, something exotic, but something stable and excitingly odd. And then let's just talk about his handling of the Arab Spring. For those of you that don't know, in 2011, about 2 neighbors on in Tunisia, a guy set himself on fire and started a massive political movement that upheaved entire North Africa. At that stage in Morocco, they were dealing with a 30% youth unemployment, raging inequality. Mohammed VI pulled his greatest political jiu-jitsu move, in my view. No tanks rolling out, no denial of the present and what's happening in the context, but instead there was an historic speech made on March the 9th.
Alhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala مولانا رسول الله وآله وصحبه شعبي العزيز.
Now, in it, he framed things beautifully. He never once made any reference to the current protests, the upheaval in the countries around him. He didn't posit it as somebody about to capitulate or somebody reacting to force from his own people. but rather as natural evolution. The 98% referendum approval introduced real changes. Parliamentary prime ministers, official Amharic language status, judicial independence, constitutional gender equality, or at least steps towards it. The result? Well, while Tunisia overthrew and stagnated and crashed, Egypt cycled through revolution and military and revolution and military. Syria, Yemen, Libya imploded. Morocco evolved peacefully within its existing structures and avoided large-scale violence. So credit where it's due, Mohammed has presided over genuine reforms that have materially improved millions of Moroccans' lives. The Madouana, Morocco's family code reform in 2004 even, this is way before the protest, was revolutionary, by regional standards especially. Before this, Moroccan women needed a male guardian's permission for basic life decisions. And that man could walk around, that guardian, and bang whoever he wants to. And if you would ask for a divorce, you would get nothing. The reforms raised marriage age, not 15 anymore, but actually be a woman. Granted women some equal rights in divorce proceedings, like I mentioned, and recognized women's right to property. In a region where women's rights are really just theoretical and non-existent, these were some concrete legal victories. The king's success in preventing Islamic extremism is also something that we're not even touching on, but it reflects a sophisticated understanding and application of Morocco's richly Sufi-influenced religious traditions. These emphasize tolerance, moderation, spiritual insight, and introspection over rigid literalism and crazy liberalism. So when King Movi, not going to call him that, that's not okay. So when King Mohammed VI came to power in 1999, a lot of journalists actually took advantage of this promising modernization campaign, and they started to report more freely on current events. However, journalism in Morocco, let's say in recent years, it's never been good. During the last 10-15 years or so, a lot of very good newspapers have died simply because there is a mass boycott from the business class, which is mostly aligned with the political regime, of course. Journalists are again facing imprisonment, harassment, and professional and political destruction if they report on any sensitive topics, including corruption, royal family activities, government failures. Independent media outlets operate under a constant threat of closure, of financial pressure, of political destruction, advertising boycotts that are organized by businesses that are fearful of government retaliation. You don't want to see yourself be associated with anything that can land you in prison for years on end. The kingdom's international reputation for reform is very sharply contrasted by this treatment of domestic critics. So where does this come from? Years of choreographed coverage, basically, and the silencing of critical outlets. This has fostered a widespread self-censorship, normalizing a palace-led narrative of gradual progress. It's very algorithmically beaten along. This leaves many citizens doubtful that any genuine political change is even possible in the country, on a citizen level, on a mind level. State broadcasters export an image of Morocco. It's this moderate kingdom. It's a tourist office. But do take note that a lot of these segments on things like CNN and international productions are literally state sponsored. And I've watched them, and God, they're convincing. But on the local level now, content analysis of primetime news bulletins shows that there's a little formula that they begin with. His Majesty oversaw. This is the start of an average 9 sentences per broadcast, according to BBC monitoring. So over years and years of this drumbeat, nurturing what scholar Abdullah Saf calls the paternalism fatigue, it drives out political discussion to off-air, onto cafes, and into silence. So despite Morocco's really grand infrastructure developments, their truly heartwarming and impressive renewable energy initiatives, there are some things that are just sacrosanct, that you don't touch if you want to have a positive, inclusive, and just society, and that is press freedom. You can't silence free speech and expect people to be happy or to be where they want to be in their lives, or to feel that way. Now, further than this, there are still very persistent and profound economic disparities too. Morocco's education system embodies and reflects these broader inequalities and lack of opportunities, with quality schooling and education basically concentrated to the urban areas, the more developed Rabats, the Casablancas, the Tangiers. But in the rest of the community and country, everywhere else, there is a wretched lack of resources, basic resources, qualified teachers to teach the people in the languages they want to, adequate facilities to foster countrywide growth, development, and opportunity. Despite constitutional commitments to improve educational development, education systems, literacy rates in rural areas remain problematically low, particularly amongst women as well, and across the country here. The education system fails to provide them with the opportunity that can match Morocco's evolving and generationally growing economy. University graduates frequently find themselves overqualified for available positions while lacking practical skills that are demanded by employers.
Combien d'années que tu cherches du travail?
Ça fait 2 ans. Je n'ai pas trouvé. Depuis 1971. L'âge, stage, c'est mon métier. J'ai mon attestation, j'ai mon diplôme. Je se promène.
On tend encore ce système?
Ça dure comme ça, parce que c'est toujours le Maroc, ça dure.
This is very dangerous because what that basically does is it creates a tendency for monopoly. So when a government official, somebody in the higher class, comes up with the solution to these plans, he is a sole slave owner that can systematize the wealth and the opportunities. That breeds social frustration, that breeds immigration pressure. So as I mentioned, while Casablanca and the other cities showcase a really empowering emerging middle class prosperity, the rest of Morocco is trapped in cycles of poverty that reforms have barely touched. Youth unemployment still exceeds 30%, and the wealth gap between urban elites that are very well connected to palace networks and the ordinary Moroccans who are just trying has arguably widened much more than ever, and especially in the last 2 or 3 years. Now, this is something that's very hard to combat, but it is something that you can point to as major infrastructure contracts, business licenses, opportunity in an economic sense, flow primarily through royal patronage systems rather than competitive markets or bars of opportunity and skill. Morocco's governance structures remain plagued by corruption, like all Africans, but in a very specific, systematized way here. It extends from local administration up to national institutions and into royalty, undermining the rule of law despite constitutional reforms that promise judicial independence. This creates barriers for the ordinary entrepreneur and opportunist and guarantees a lot more of the money in the pocket of those that have access to power, not skill. See, the judiciary is nominally independent now since 2011 and that constitutional reform, but it continues to operate within constraints that prevent meaningful accountability in a practical level for any high-level corruption. Because how do you challenge somebody who is in power from the outside with something with lesser power even though independent. Just consider this for a moment. If you've got a royal authority or somebody in strong political power with a whole network, doesn't this limit your recourse in administrative abuse? Because very quickly you either bribe, it's the silver or bullet technique, but in a formal way. You either buy the person off or you threaten him off. This creates a system dependent on royal wisdom rather than robust institutions capable of self-correction. Wisdom incoming though. Social media monitoring is also very concerning, and the internet restrictions demonstrate how international and technological advancement serves state control rather than citizen empowerment, with authorities tracking online criticism and using criminal laws to prosecute political expression. I hope in fact that this video airs in Morocco and that you guys don't get too angry at me for shooting bluntly here. I just don't want to talk outside of my knowledge, but I do want to talk according to my values and as far as I can see. Okay, now to try and tiptoe around the Western Sahara point. What's difficult about this is that there is a big difference in how normal people view politics and how a state would run politics. Now, unfortunately, politics and geopolitics is a play or be played game. Western Sahara represents Morocco's most significant geopolitical challenge and definitely their most long-term challenge. Because their military operations and occupation, the settlement expansion itself, it creates an ongoing international isolation and a resource drain. It's something that you really want to avoid in the situation of the most extremes, though I doubt it would ever get to Israel levels. However, there's no denying that this is a Muslim country that traded basically support for Israel in exchange for support in Western Sahara in terms of a public relations and international recognition of sovereignty, Morocco's sovereignty over Western Sahara. The sad thing about politics is that there is a minority group here that is, quite frankly, being shoved aside, I want to say. However, in the bigger picture of politics, also one has to admit that there isn't much to gain for them by being a separate state. Now, I know the hate is going to be incoming for me saying such blunt things, but hear it out. Morocco will take care of them, does take care of them, and being part of a larger economy is actually very useful in terms of your own value in economics. Especially if you've got a population of hypothetically under 1 million people here. We're talking, I think, 300, 400,000. However, at the same time, the control of the Western Sahara and the operations there, it's an estimated $2 billion annually that it costs Morocco at this stage. That diverts a lot of resources away from education, away from healthcare and economic development. Programs that could address Morocco's structural problems more fundamentally. The authoritarian methods required to maintain control over Western Sahara is also things like media censorship, movement restrictions, and suppression of pro-independence activism, or pro-any activism, if we're honest. So, it's very idealistic of me to try and preach everybody should understand and find a middle ground, but that is essentially what should happen. I'm just not sure whether, and tell me perhaps below, whether it doesn't bother younger Moroccans to trade international bargaining chips like this, and rather than, I don't know, how else do you see this playing out? That's about all I've actually got on the Western Sahara bit. I'm sorry if I built it up a bit more than it should have been. But I do want to contrast the other monarchies again here to Mohammed VI, just to show that he's doing something more dynamic. And I mean this in the context of the discussion. A hands-on constitutional monarch. He shapes Morocco's strategic direction while trusting elected officials to some degree to implement policy. Press freedom remains limited, but here's my take. If you embody the values of your state, if you live within the law yourself, even as a king, if you listen to the people, then you shouldn't fear criticism. And definitely not criticism of government policy. That's how any nation and discussion grows. What you should fear is direct attacks, physical attacks on your life, perhaps. Be safe physically. But let journalists criticize the Prime Minister. Let them question Parliament. Let them investigate and expose corruption, whether that be in the House of the King or in the government. But let them voice the people of your state. And let the monarchy become stronger through this. Let the monarchy be informed and adapted and guided to where it wants to be so that it can play the role that it has to in guiding its people to where they want to be. Okay, so for this next bit, I've got a lot of niche and controversial opinions regarding politics, and I want to say the real power when it comes to how to run a state and government. And I think that a lot of how we go about understanding politics is actually getting in the way of our free world. So for this bit, I didn't actually prepare anything script-wise because I've been working on that script for way too long already. And this is a ramble of 40 minutes in itself. Don't worry, it won't be. I'll try to keep it short. But essentially, I've got some notes. And democracy isn't real. What do I mean by that? So have a look at our altruistic principles and ideas versus how they actually pan out. If we look at things like the YouTube algorithm, Google searches, or just the media in general and the impact that these things have had on woke culture, especially on our academic institutions, on our laws, on our societal views. For the negative, just to mention, but let's not go into that right now. Focus on the core objectivity here. Nobody at YouTube or Google or Facebook or anywhere else in our free democratic society is going to go out of their way to try and force propaganda into your eyes and down your ears. But they do. But they do this through basic psychology and human tendency, through confirmation bias and our in-group, out-group mentalities. Our, yes, that's right because that agrees with my opinion. They want to provide you, sorry, my thing was off there. They want to provide you with opportunity of free choice. But how can you know what you don't know to choose from what you want? It's impossible. Philosophically, it's impossible. Look at the contrasting success of Putin, of Xi. Now, disclaimer here, I am not pro China or Russia in this coming World War beef thing going on. Again, I'm highlighting this as objective examples of what a dictator can do. It's something along the lines of Plato's philosopher King. Imagine somebody that is in power, somebody that will be in power for a generation. Look at what El Salvador is doing now. If you can have somebody that actually cares, somebody that is actually a good person, who obeys by your own moral law as much as you do, have that person, and of course and be intelligent and informed geopolitically, economically speaking. But if you can have that person ruling your country, you should rather have that person rule your country than have your very stupid people, because all people are stupid, vote. Because look at what's happening with America. So, I ask you this question. What may a good dictator look like? A philosopher king to the truest extent. So it's ugly, yes, but it's not a Moroccan ugly that I'm trying to get to here. It's the fact that King Mohammed is between a rock and a hard place with his censorship thing, but I genuinely believe that the economic inequality, the struggle of Africa that I've mentioned so often, this humanly dumb world that we live in, is where a proper constitutional monarchy would shine. And it is really perhaps the best type of setup to have a king, to have him set the moral tone, champion social justice and values, and hold elections. Have a independent judiciary that can supervise and hold elected leaders accountable for their delivery. Have all citizens from peasant to king be held accountable if they break national law. When the monarch is also the government, there's nowhere for public frustration to go but up and in, into revolution, into ousting, into revolving around the same door all the time. And the moment you do find someone good, you're going to lose him within 5 years, within 10 years. When the monarch is separate from the government, when he becomes the people's advocate against politicians who fail, somebody who has veto power, ambition, direction, and image, role model, while being held to that by the public, by the people, he'll inspire them. They will inspire him. They will come together to create a constitutionally elected body of power, and they will have a system that keeps it clean and filters out the liars, the hypocrites, the people who are corrupt and not truly Moroccan, not truly African, not truly the person you want in your country, the person you want in your jail. So the question isn't about whether King Mohammed VI is a good king. He definitely is, especially relatively speaking. The question is whether he can become a great king, whether he can do something truly revolutionary and new, whether he'll have the vision and the courage to become a person who can live under the spotlight and still do the right thing. The thing that all Moroccans want him to do. To be all that Moroccans want him to be. To be that example. Allah al-Watan al-Malik. But maybe it's time to put the people somewhere in the equation too. Importantly, the Moroccan model demonstrates how Islamic societies can achieve modernization, how women's rights advancements through reform grounded in religious authenticity can be better than secular imposition through democratic force. This approach has proven much more sustainable, much more stable and socially acceptable than the alternatives attempted in any neighboring country, in any other country, in my view. Let me know your thoughts. Tell me what you would like next. And I'm sorry that the mustache has to go now.